Hello LitComp 2. This is a video that introduces the Great Gatsby final test. It is a writing and it is focused on analysis. So I wanted to do a how-to video to kind of help you understand what the assignment is, what I'm looking for. There's a sample, there's a rubric, and then also some of the skills I want you to demonstrate in the paper overall. So this is the handout, or it's rather a packet that you will reference. This is the PowerPoint. So we'll start and kind of finish up the film, but ultimately I'm using the prove me right, prove me wrong setup to kind of help you push bold analytical statements. So analysis is picking apart the literature and making your own conclusions. It's sharing out your takeaways. So if you look right here, what are some statements you can make about the book that basically have claims, they are explainable, they're debatable, they're worthy of discussion, they tend to use powerful vocab, they tend to play with sentence structure, and they really try to push the button of the reader who is reading your piece and making them wonder, what do you mean? So for instance, Daisy is the true antagonist of the story. She is selfish and superficial. So that's a pretty harsh claim about the character. And I'd have to explain how she's the antagonist and who would be the protagonist. I'd have to explain her selfish choices. I'd also have to explain how she's superficial. And so what I did in these bold statements is I make something that is debatable. I have multiple talking points. So this is a talking point. The selfishness is a talking point. The superficiality is a talking point. So here's some more. Daisy is a product of her environment. So this could be curious, and I'd have to talk about what was her environment. What is her environment? I could talk about when she was in Louisville, when she was a young girl, and she was so flirty with all the officers, and how she first met Gatsby. But then I could also talk about what is the patriarchal world, and I would talk about how she basically moves into patriarchy with her husband Tom. And then finally, the one down here. The American dream is a fallacy and only meant for the rich. So I'd have to talk about what is the American dream? How is it demonstrated in the book? Fallacy is a fancy word for saying like it's fake or not real. So I'd talk about, the falsity of the green light. I'd talk about how, lots of characters want to be rich, but really it's only the East Egg Society that masters it. So hopefully you can see these are all worthy, bold statements. They have to be proved right or wrong. I could flip it around too. I could say the American dream is possible and is achievable for anybody, so I could flip it. So it could be a prove me right or prove me wrong statement. And I want you to brainstorm some of these even before we get into the paper, because these could be the talking points that turn into your actual paper. So let's talk about the paper in general. Here's the description. So this is a little bit of overview, and it's a upper level college oriented paper. So these are response papers. I did these a lot in college for English, but also for my social studies classes. And they're what I call a short paper. So it's about a page, maybe a page and a half, no more than 2 pages, where you really kind of talk out what you gained from the book. You could phrase it as what were your greatest takeaways, and kind of coming up with several takeaways, as opposed to just prove me right or prove me wrong. You also have to show good writing technique, a lot like the Me Mentor text. You have to use quotes and good integration. And then finally, you will have this overarching thesis statement that will be in the intro of the paper, and you could also come back to in your conclusion. So we just talked about brainstorm, some really important statements. Those are your takeaways. Those are your aha moments from Fitzgerald's work, and those are going to shape your paper. So I'm actually going to jump down to my paper that I wrote for night. So as you can see, the paper is about a page and a half long. If you notice, it's got visual presence. What do I mean by that? It's got a title. It's got some subheaders. I notice it's kind of broken up a little bit. You can see there's some shorter paragraphs and longer paragraphs. It should read kind of like an editorial or an article you would find online, because we read in a digital world, in a digital format, and this is a typed document. So I want you to embrace that, and I also want you to see it's conversational. It moves and flows between big, long paragraphs of conversation and then shorter, punchier little things like Night is a despair that eclipses his world. So I wrote mine about night. Hopefully you guys read this in English 3 or LitComp 1. I didn't want to steal ideas from Gatsby. So here is my bold statements. There's symbolism of night and day, hope and despair. When somebody is dehumanized, they start to dehumanize themselves. So these are kind of my powerful, catchy titles. And then I have this big grand takeaway down here. Our memories have power, our actions have impact, and never forget. So I played a little bit with style and voice in those, and then I want you guys to take a few minutes to pause the video and read through this entire sample and see what do you notice about how I put it together and what ideas can you steal and borrow. Anytime I give you a sample, the goal is for you to study the techniques, use them, and basically make your own set of writing techniques or writing ideas that you can borrow and steal from mine. So pause and read. I'm going to scroll up here. Okay. So hopefully you read through the sample. So the goal is you need to come up with some, powerful statements or things that you want to talk about. You do need to do planning. Planning is part of the rubric. So you can plan digitally. You can plan on scrap sheets of paper. You will turn in that planning with your final paper and the rubric. Once you get a plan of action, you might need to start collecting evidence to kind of support your bold statements and your claims about the book. You should have 2 big claims or 2 big takeaways to share in your paper, just like mine. And then you need to make a thesis. So I always tell my students thesis writing happens a little bit later during the planning and research stage of your paper. It's hard to just make a thesis statement first and foremost because your comprehension and understanding of the literature should change and evolve as you revisit the literature and as you come up with these smaller claims and these smaller observations about like the literary elements. And then you make your big, grand, overarching thesis. So thesis and claim are different. Claims are like little punchy statements about the book. They're a little bit more focused in on key aspects of the book or key scenes. And then your thesis is the big, grand idea from the author as a whole. It looks at the meaning of the whole book. It's one of the biggest, most important messages of the entire novel, and that becomes your thesis. Good thesis statements, they should not be lists. They should actually be author and theme focused, and they kind of do a big generalized statement, which then you pick apart and talk out a little bit better in the intro and conclusion of the paper. So I want you to use this template. So you'll say, Fitzgerald argues, illustrate, critiques, debates. Use really good analysis verbs. If you don't know what an analysis verb, just Google analysis verb. There's tons of them. They're great vocab. So I would say Fitzgerald argues, and then you got to have your theme. So maybe your theme is wealth. Maybe your theme is social etiquette. Maybe your theme is selfishness. We had a huge list on the backboard, but you want to pull out the biggest theme, your favorite theme, the top theme from the novel, and then you're going to tell me what does it say about that theme. So you could say Fitzgerald critiques social classes and reveals how people are very unwilling to accept people outside of their social circles. So then what happens is that becomes my big talking point. I talk about how people are kind of cliquish and how people really have social status and they want social status, and that is one of Fitzgerald's biggest critiques and complaints because of the society of the East and West Egg and how they reject people like Gatsby, who are actually good people for the most part, but he's not the right kind of rich. So that's thesis statement. So I brainstormed, I came up with some claims. I started to look for my evidence, and then I craft a really nice thesis using this template. As I go back through, I'm still planning, all right? You've got to give yourself time to plan your paper. You just start typing it, the organization's going to be rough, the ideas are not going to be as in-depth as they could be. Then you need to look at your evidence and your talking points, and you need to identify what we're going to call craft shoutouts. Craft shoutouts are like nice, subtle, blended in vocab that allows you to kind of acknowledge how the book is written as well as why the book is written. So it's a nice blending of craft and content analysis. So if you look at this example right here, I shout out to characterization and irony. I don't define it. Like, I know what irony is. I've been to college and talked about the vocab in college. I don't need you to define characterization or irony or juxtaposition. But if you look and read this, I kind of flow in some nice vocab about English language, and I say Daisy's characterization is ironic and alluring. At first, her beauty and sadness is attractive, but the irony is it's all tied to her money and privilege. It doesn't mask the ugliness inside of her when she makes bad choices. So as you can see, this is really nice conversation. It's really nice prove me right, prove me wrong information. It's just kind of interesting to read. And that's the goal of the response paper, is to draw the interest of your audience, aka me. So you've done all these steps, which are all planning and idea making, and now you're going to start writing the paper. You do need to push yourself in terms of structure and organization. I do want to see an intro, a conclusion, and then 2 talking points. Now, I'm not necessarily looking for 4 paragraphs directly. Some kids will break up those body paragraphs. Some kids will break up the intro and conclusion a little bit. I want you to think a little bit about the Me Mentor text and how that was a little bit more playful in terms of organization. I do not want a 5-paragraph essay. Please, please, please. They're not very successful. They tend to be very listy, and they also are not very upper level. And then make sure you don't just summarize out the book, all right? You might have to give me a little context, but ultimately I know the book very well. I want you to tell me why the book is incorporating these scenes, why this characterization is important. And then finally, after you get done, or as you're working paragraph by paragraph, you do want to give yourself time to revise or think about word choice. Grammar is still just as important as it's been in your first 2 practice writes, and also just thinking about how you can make voice stand out in your paper. So here's the rubric. 20 points is for the analysis and the content, the stuff that you say. 20 points is for your actual quote choices, because that shows your evidence of reading. 15 points is for how you integrate those quotes. Don't let them hover, all right? Make sure that you use a dab, a dollop, or lots of sauce. 5 points is related to your mechanics and just making sure you use traditional MLA format up at the top of the document. 20 points is for your voice. Voice is word choice. It is connected to how you set up your sentences. It's what makes, hopefully, my sample paper the most interesting for you to read, because it is conversational. It's got a mix of casual, but also more sophisticated language and organization. 10 points is for how you organize it. Is it effective? Does it create an easy read? Does it create kind of a visual read, like a digital visual read? And then 10 points is for your planning. So you'll turn in a planning sheet and you'll show me evidence of revision. We'll talk about dashes with this paper, so that's going to be a new grammar device added, and then you'll still have semicolons and stuff like that. And then I'll just check in and see how your workshop is going. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about the paper. Hopefully you noticed some really cool voice elements happening in my paper. And hopefully you're able to start planning out and organizing your paper focus today, workshop on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the final draft is going to be due on Monday. So I'm very excited to see what you guys have to say about Fitzgerald's book.